So now that we've looked at film and videotape, let's take a look at the next evolution of video that came into play when we were changing the way we would record and play things back. And this happened in the late 90s. A new type of media came out called the DVD, and it stood for either one of two things. It could either be a digital versatile disc or a digital video disc. And the difference between the two is a versatile disc was formatted by a computer and would act like a file storage, like a thumb drive, a floppy drive. You could write data to it and treat it like a disc. Now, a digital video disc was formatted slightly differently and contained a specific type of video files on it. And with this, you could play back audio and video that you would see on your home theaters, or if you go to the store and buy a movie on DVD, this is the format or the way that it would be formatted. And you couldn't interchange these very well, so you really couldn't take a digital versatile disc and put it in a DVD player because it couldn't read the files and the information on it. Now, the digital video disc could be played in a computer if it had the right drivers and if it had a video player that acted like a DVD player. So there was a little bit of crossover, but not really much. And the DVD was based off of the concept of the CD-ROM, where you could take audio and video, in this case, convert them into digital format of ones and zeros, and then put them onto a foiled line disc. And then you'd be using a laser to read these. And I think the first generation of the lasers were red in color. And one of the great advantages of the DVDs or the video disc was that you could randomly access any part of the disc. With film and with videotape, you would have to fast forward or rewind to go back and find the exact point. With DVDs, you could use the controls to just jump ahead, jump back to the middle, go back to the beginning, come back to the bottom, and move around freely anywhere in the disc. And the discs could be even set up to have chapters, so that every time you would hit record, or you could put a mark in for important parts, and then you could just jump chapter to chapter to find exactly what you needed. And TV stations began using the technology, so they would take small DVDs that could hold like 15 minutes to half an hour and put them into a portable camera that could be used to record and come back, and then they could copy the files or play them into a tape deck to do some basic editing. And then about a year, and then about a decade later, DVDs underwent a change. And so one of the things that had happened was they realized that if they changed the color of the laser from red to blue, they could make the blue laser a narrower, finer beam, and it could read more information. So they could put more information on the disc than they could with a regular DVD player. But after a decade, the DVD players with the red lasers had already saturated the market, so they had to come up with a new format. And this led to the DVD wars. So at the time, two major companies had come out with their own version of a higher definition DVD. So Sony came out with a disc known as the Blu-ray, and a competing company known as Toshiba had come out with the concept that they called the HD DVD. Both used blue lasers, but the technology behind them was just a little bit different. So to kind of push their products and to push the lasers, they were doing a couple things. Sony had included their Blu-ray DVD into their PlayStation 3 console, and Toshiba had partnered with Microsoft to put the HD DVD into their Xbox console. One of the disadvantages was the Xbox didn't include a DVD or an HD DVD player. This was a separate plug-in box, so you'd buy this box, put it next to your machine, and then plug it in. Whereas with the PlayStations, it was natively incorporated. Something else that had happened was DVDs were releasing games, and they were talking about the quality of a standard DVD versus a high definition DVD, and how if you look at what was being played and being put back, you could see there was more detail, more definition, better quality. And so when the movies were coming out, they would release movies in both formats, the Blu-ray and the HD DVD, to match both the players. And then to kind of make a little more money, the studios would add different special features to the DVDs. So a lot of things in addition to the movie that you could get things like the director's track. You could get scenes that were deleted for some reason or another, so you could watch those deleted scenes. You could also watch the goof reel or the gag reel, where you would see just clips of the actors breaking characters and laughing and forgetting their lines, or they would try to shoot a scene and they couldn't catch something, and so they would shoot it like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 scenes, so you just see them constantly like missing their line or their mark. And so the studios then started realizing that they could sell a movie 2 times. So like on one disc, they would put the director's track, so you can hear the directors and the actors talking about the movie. And then on the other disc, they would put like the outtakes or the gag reel or the deleted scenes. So this would cause people to want to buy both of them, both of the disc. Granted, you had to have a Blu-ray and an HD DVD player to play the individual ones. And one of the advantages that helped with Sony and the Blu-ray was Disney. They came out and they said that we're going to release all of our movies, but only to the Blu-ray format. We're not going to try to split them up over both. And once they did that, pretty much the entire consumer market had decided to start shifting more and more over to Sony and the Blu-ray. And then later on, even Microsoft partnered with Sony to add the Blu-ray player to their next generation of Xbox, the Xbox One. So in the end, between the two wars, Sony beat out Toshiba because they had the Disney contract was a very big push for them. Now, in 2003, another type of memory came out, and we found another way to store data, and this was called solid state memory. And you may know these as like little SD cards or other types of non-movable data. And so with this this type of media didn't really have any moving parts. So like a hard drive, it didn't require mechanical motors and heads to read disks inside. All the information was stored on a chip, and no part of the storage device had any moving parts. And so with this, the media had gotten smaller. So now we've gotten things smaller from a DVD to, you know, again, these little small chips. And likewise, that they could hold a vast amount of video and audio. And over the years, we've gotten better at compressing the information and allowing the devices, the media, to store greater and greater bits of information. And because they had no moving parts, it reduced the maintenance costs on the hardware that would incorporate them. So whereas before we would have a camera that would have to generate a laser, and then you'd have motors that would move the laser up and down, or if you had a camera that would accept a videotape, again, there's like motors inside that would take the tape and spool it into the camera to record and then retract it back in. This SSD, the solid state memory, didn't have that. So that would save wear and tear on the cameras because no moving parts. Likewise, they required less electricity to operate. So that means a battery that you could put into a former camera for tape or DVD would last a lot longer in a camera that now had an SSD because it was able to more efficiently handle storage of data. This also gave us the ability to transmit and upload digital files from the camera straight to the TV station. There was no conversion. And I've seen some things that would be shot and the camera would have a little transmitter on top of or on the back of the camera itself, and then the operator could just get to a location that they could broadcast a signal back to the station and send all their footage without having to drive back and have all the video and the information processed. So that could also save time for news gathering. And then, like I said, over the years, the amount of information that we could store on solid state media has drastically improved. So we would have traditional floppy disks that could store like 1.44 megabytes. And so when the SD cards, first came out, they could store like 8 gigabytes, which is 8,000 megabytes. And then we would go from like 8 to 12 to 24. And back in 2016, they came up with the 1 terabyte SSD. And there's also a smaller version of an SSD called a micro SD, which is about the size, which is about, a little less than half the size of one of the traditional SSDs. And so about every other year, they would start to play leapfrog. So like in 2016, the main one came up with 1 terabyte. 3 years later, the micro one came up with 1 terabyte, and then they're working to get to like 2 terabytes and 4. And I think the latest we have is this one is at the 2 terabyte size, and we're kind of holding out there. There's going to be a change in the way they design and transfer all this information to get us a jump beyond the 2 terabyte size. And one of the things that can help us out is the size of the video that we shoot. So if we were shooting standard definition versus a high definition versus 4K definition, that's going to change in how much video we can put on a card. So 1 terabyte card or to get about 1 terabyte. So for 4K, you would have about 47 hours of video. At 1080, which is using a fourth of that, you're going to have about 125, 130. If you're shooting something in standard definition, you could have that up to about 275 hours worth of video. Likewise, if you translate that into days per terabyte, you would get 2 days, about 5 days, or about 11 days of storage. And then another way they changed video storage was the same concept as an SSD, but now they use it in a much larger format. And this is a file server. So they take a computer hard drive. In this case, I have one on the left, which was a traditional platter that would use a magnetic storage, and the one on the right, which is solid state, which would have a bunch of smaller little solid state chips soldered into it to create a massive storage device. And so they would just take all these drives, put them in a row of computers, and have what's called as a file server. And so this is just a massive amount of storage in a centralized location. So, and with these file servers, they could be centralized to the station or to a company or anywhere in the world. And so they could have multiple editors could access the files from this central location. So if a person in New York went and shot a story about the World Trade Center bombing, if we had this technology was more prevalent today than it was back then, you could have other stations from all over the world go to the same file server where they were uploading video, and then everybody would have the ability to edit it. Now, because these are file servers, they also give the ability to make backups. So the computer can automatically make a duplicate of the information and save it on another file server completely in a different location. So you had a redundancy that if you had one computer, one hard drive failed, there would be another one with that information to keep it backed up and keep it going. So it makes it a lot easier to share information between different servers, different companies, different networks, different stations, as well as accessing archive information. Traditional archive of videotapes could take up bookcases and bookcases and bookcases with magnetic tapes, which after about 10-15 years would start to lose their magnetic properties, and the data in the video would start degrading and getting lost. Whereas with the digital format, we're able to keep a higher quality for it for pretty much indefinitely. And so if you wanted to go back into the archives and access the original footage of the JFK assassination, you would have to go to one particular facility in the United States or in the world, find what you needed, and then make a copy of it and bring it back. And so this would take time, it would take effort, and it would cost money to get copies of things from the archives. Whereas with the file servers, it's as simple as opening a search window, typing what you want, and then you can duplicate it or start editing with that as you need. And then when we take a series of file servers, group them together into a larger computing format, we get what's known as a cloud server. So a file server and a cloud server can work pretty much the same way, that you can have this massive computer storage either at your station, at your house, or you could contract with a company that could keep them all in another location. So places like Dropbox, Google Drive, Amazon Storage, they have just massive storage facilities all over the world that they contract with people to provide space as a file server. But they also have the ability to do remote processing for you. So you can even go in and pull up a web browser, go into your files on Amazon and do some editing. If you want, you can go to the YouTube video servers, and if it's a video that you own, you can go in and they have the possibility for you to trim off the beginning and the end and do some basic editing for your video. And at one point they were even looking at editing as far as putting together separate clips, adding music, adding voice, and doing some very rudimentary editing. Sometimes they'll take it offline to try to change it or come up, and then it may show back up in a newer format. But editing through the internet has been an option. Likewise with your email. For a while, Troy University used to keep their emails housed in our own IT department, but now we go in and we use a web browser to access our emails that are stored on a Microsoft server elsewhere. And you've also been able to do video conferencing through web pages. So like things like Zoom and Teams, you now have the ability to use a web browser to process all of that video information for you, and you just send them a basic data feed and they'll send that back to you. So that's just a look at videotape and solid storage media and how it gets used to record video, audio for any productions, whether it's going to be live or recorded